Alright, everybody, welcome back. So this is the first video where I don't have any notes to go over. I don't have anything I want to talk about. Like specifically, I'm kind of just going to take it from the top here. So the Canadian Cup drought is extended to 31 years after the Edmonton Oilers lost last night against the Vegas Golden Knights in 6 games. Now, there has been a lot of arguments I've seen over the Canadian drought because it's been 31 years and Gary Bettman took over 31 years ago as the NHL's commissioner. Is that the reason why? No, it is not. I don't think it is. I can't find any legitimate argument as to why it is, besides the fact that there's more American teams than there is Canadian teams, and that's not even really Bettman's fault. The main reason why there is more American teams than there is Canadian teams is because the Canadian dollar is more expensive and it's more difficult to bring a team to Canada, even though it would probably be better than some of the American teams we have right now. I won't deny that whatsoever, but I honestly do think that bringing a team to Canada isn't as easy as people make it out to be. There's a lot of money loopholes you got to go through. There's a lot of things that people don't know about it, and I'm not saying that I'm the expert. I'm definitely not. I'm 16 years old. What do I know? But honestly, it has nothing to do with Gary Bettman. I really don't think it does. I think the main reason why is what I said. There's more American teams than Canadian teams, and I think that's the main reason why. And it's much more difficult for, the Canadian teams to make it far. And, of course, I believe three Canadian teams made the playoffs this year. The first one being the Winnipeg Jets. They lost in round one. The next one being the Maple Leafs. They lost in round two. And then the other one being the Oilers, and they lost in round two as well. I don't believe there were any other Canadian teams that made it this year, and there's only 7. So 3 of the 7 made it out of this year. And arguably, I'd say probably about 4 of those 7 are in a questionable spot right now. I would. There are some that kind of leave me wondering, like, what is really going to happen with them, and it does leave me a lot of questions. So I'm going to go through every team here, kind of talk about, like, their odds of getting close to a Stanley Cup and who's the closest and all that stuff. Because they're really the 7 teams that are our hope for another Canadian team to win it. And let's just say, and the other argument is too, before I get into the teams, is with the Gary Bettman argument, if he was trying to do it for money, a Canadian team would either win the Stanley Cup or they'd be in the finals every single year. Because can you imagine the amount of money that they would make off of a Canadian team being in the finals or even being even close there? Imagine how much money they made off of Montreal. Now that was the year with the COVID bubble arena type stuff, so obviously that was not a guarantee. And as well as that too, in those divisions, it was basically a guarantee that a Canadian team would make it to the conference finals anyways. But if they were doing it for money, if they were rigging it for money, then a Canadian team would be in the finals every year. Surely. Or even better, it'd be 2 Canadian teams in the finals, and a Canadian team would win it every single year. But that's just not how the NHL works. It's not rigged. It's hard to rig hockey. It's very hard to rig hockey. Somebody brought that up in a live stream last night that I had a very good point. And the other argument too is that he's rigging it so the American markets make more money. I guess that's true, but then again, there's more American teams than there is Canadian teams, so it's very easy to do that. It isn't that hard, and again, how can you rig hockey? It's super difficult, so I really don't understand. So we'll go through each team here, kind of talk about their odds of getting close to a Stanley Cup. We'll start out with the Calgary Flames. The Flames, of course, finished outside of a playoff spot this year. They barely missed out, but yeah, look, Calgary. Honestly, there are a lot of questionable spots right now with the Flames. They need a brand new general manager. They need a brand new coach. But I do think they will be back in the playoffs next year. I don't know about a Stanley Cup, but I do think they will be back in the playoffs next year with guys like Jonathan Huberdeau, Nazem Kadri. They're just too good to miss out. They have solid players. And I said this before with many Flames videos I've made, saying that the chemistry just really wasn't there. And I think that, with Daryl Sutter leaving and all those negative rumors that they had, and as well as that too, a second year under this pretty much new core that they had, it's difficult to adjust. You had whole new guys come into the lineup like Huberdeau, Uyghur, and Kadri. Those are 3 new superstars that come up into the Flames lineup. It takes a while for them to adjust. And I do think that with this coming season, they will be way better and they will be much more adjusted to each other, and I think they will do better next season. Of course, it all depends on what they get with their coach and their GM, but that's also a discussion for yet again another time. I believe the Oilers are up next. If I'm looking at this correctly, yes, they are. So Edmonton, of course, the Battle of Alberta has been a big thing for a long time. That's always been a battle. But the Oilers always were a team that were always in the race. They have been for the past couple of years. There were those years after they drafted McDavid where they just couldn't make the playoffs. They just weren't good. Now that argument, I think, is kind of gone. I think they have a much better core than they've had in previous years. And look, they lost in 6 games this year. They made the conference finals last year. I honestly do think, though, that they are probably the best team with the best odds to win the cup, to win a cup for Canada. I got to be truly honest with you. And it's mainly because of the fact that they have McDavid, a superstar. They have Draisaitl, who played amazing in this year's playoffs. There are guys, though, in that second round series that looked invisible. Nugent Hopkins, I mean, he had points, but he didn't have enough points. 1 goal is not good enough for a guy who had 104 points in the regular season. There are also those depth issues, and as well as that too, there's the goaltending problem. Like Skinner and Campbell, that's a big issue still. So there's still a lot of underlying issues in Edmonton, but I think if they can solve them, I think they are the team with the best odds to go all the way. It just sucks that they're out this early because I really had them going far. Montreal, I believe, is next. I feel like I'm missing a team, but I believe Montreal is up next, unless if I don't know what teams in Canada. But yeah, because the Canadiens obviously were in their second year of the rebuild this year. Of course, there was that argument. There's a lot of better players in Montreal this year, like Cole Caulfield's played well this season, was hurt. There's also some questions, too, like Slavkovsky. He was the first overall pick, played kind of mediocre in his time before he got injured. But yeah, I do think Montreal has a pretty good odds too. When they do come out of this rebuild, they will be a very solid team. There's just a lot of underlying questions with them as well. Next up, then, I believe you have the Ottawa Senators. So that's the 4th team so far. Ottawa, of course, I think they will make the playoffs next year. I can't see a scenario where they don't. They truly have a really good roster. They got Claude Giroux, Alex DeBrincat, Josh Norris, Brady Tkachuk, Tim Stutzel, just to name a few of those guys. I think if they solve their underlying goaltending problem, I think they will be way closer and they will have a much better shot at going far in next year's playoffs. But then again, I do want to bring this argument up too. It takes a while for some teams to win in the playoffs. It does. Toronto's, I guess, the biggest example, even though they haven't really won much yet. They broke the drought this year, of course, but they kind of started a new drought, it feels like. But honestly, it takes a while for some teams to win in the playoffs. You look at Colorado. I don't want to refer to American teams, but I do want to look at Colorado. They lost in the second round so many years in a row, and then they came out of it and won. Washington, they lost so many years in the second round, and then they finally broke out and won it. So there is that chance, and there is that possibility that a team, who has lost a lot in the playoffs, like Edmonton, like Toronto, for example, that if they do finally break through, they could go all the way. Just Toronto just could not do that this year. It is difficult to win in the playoffs. It's the hardest trophy to win in sports, hands down. There's no denying it whatsoever. I've seen arguments of the World Cup. No, the Stanley Cup is much harder because mainly it's like a pro sport. The World Cup's like a thing that happens every 4 years. So I guess you could make that World Cup argument, but the NHL is way more competitive and way more difficult to win for sure. Next up there, I believe, after the Ottawa Senators is, I think, the Toronto Maple Leafs. The Maple Leafs, I feel like I'm missing a team, but I think I have every team so far. Toronto, of course, was one of those teams that, broke the drought this year. I'm wearing them. And then they lost in 5 games to the Florida Panthers. There's still a lot of underlying questions with the Maple Leafs. I believe I will be making a lot of Maple Leafs videos over the course of the next couple of days and a couple of weeks because I feel like they are going to make some changes behind the bench and on the ice as well. I really do believe that, so I think I'm going to be making a lot of Leafs-related videos in the coming days. But yeah, Toronto, there's been a lot of people saying that they want to stick with this core. They want to keep this core for one more season. I think, honestly, this next season will be their last year to really kind of contend for it. I thought this year with them breaking through, at least if they put up if they competed well against Florida, then the whole argument would be different. Like, let's say if they lost in not even like 5 games. Like, let's say they lost in like 7 games to Florida, but they played really competitive down the stretch and they were close to winning those games each time, then I would honestly say that, yeah, maybe you would keep this core around for another year and you would have a good shot at winning it next year. But honestly, they got outplayed by Florida for most of that series. But Bobrovsky, when they weren't being outplayed, Bobrovsky stood tall on them. So I'm wondering whether or not they're going to keep the core the same. Matthews does want to stay with Toronto. Samsonov wants to stay with Toronto. Sheldon Keefe and Dubas want to stay with Toronto. So there's honestly there's a lot of rumors. And then there's also that, too, of maybe Brendan Shanahan gets fired. There's so much going on with Toronto that, honestly, I don't even know where to start. That's the whole video for another time. Vancouver, I believe, is up next. And Vancouver is probably the team that I would honestly argue to be the furthest one out. Honestly, I think they would be the furthest one out. I think I would even put Montreal ahead of them. Honestly, I just look at Vancouver and I think to myself, well, like what the hell? They are such a confusing team to see management wise. They have fired so many coaches since the last time they made the playoffs. They've fired so many general managers, and they've just made so many moves that have left my head scratching. The Bo Horvat trade was smart for them. That was not a bad trade whatsoever. In hindsight, they might have even won that trade. And then they make the Hronek deal. What is that? And I got a video coming out about Vancouver in a few days, but really, just why? What is the point of that? So there are a lot of moves with Vancouver that really have scratched my head, and I'm wondering, they could very well be the furthest one out of making it because they think that they can be competitive and make the playoffs, but they just aren't good enough with the core that they have. And I think next year could be the underlying year for guys like Pettersson and Hughes to maybe wonder, do we really want to stay with this team for an extended period of time? And then the last one, I believe, is Winnipeg. I still feel like I'm missing a team, but I don't think I am. Winnipeg also is probably in a pretty bad spot. I think after this year, we'll really see where the Jets are going to go because they got a lot of rumors. Hellebuck's going to expire. Blake Wheeler might be on the move. Scheifele might be on the move. Pierre-Luc Dubois might be on the move. Rick Bowness said in that 5-game series against Vegas there was no pushback, and that was the biggest fall-off I've seen in a while. That team was competing for first up until January, and then after January, they just fell off a cliff. So honestly, I'm really not looking forward to, or I'm really interested to see what's going to happen with Winnipeg because there have been rumors of maybe guys getting traded out of there. So, hey, you look at some of these. Honestly, you got one team in Calgary that's kind of going to hopefully bounce back next year. You have a team in Edmonton that, even though they lost this year, will still be a good team next year. You have Montreal, who's improving next year. You got Ottawa, who should be making a push to the playoffs next year. You got Toronto, who is left with a lot of questions, yes, but I do think they will be competitive again next year. You got Vancouver, who's kind of in a weird spot, and they probably won't make it next year. And then you got Winnipeg, who could make it next year, but could also tear it all down next year. So that leaves you, I'd say, probably 4 of the 7 teams, maybe 5 of the 7 teams could be in contention for the playoffs next year. But of course, who knows? And going back again to the rigged arguments of Gary Bettman and all those markets, again, the argument is stupid because I honestly do think that because there's more teams in the American market, it's much easier for an American team to win the cup than a Canadian team. And just you can't rig hockey. You can't script hockey. It's impossible. You can script football. You can script the NBA, but you can't script hockey. It's difficult too. But anyways, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Thank you all very much for watching. For all of our supporters, I really do appreciate it. Make sure to subscribe down below if you are new. We'll keep these 2023 reviews going. We still have the majority of the Canadian teams to do. But yeah, thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. Adios.